Hi guys, 2023 is likely to see a Scottish referendum taking place, and while the outcome of it still remains unknown, and I say this because polling, while a good measure, is far from perfect, especially 12 months out, but also because there isn't a campaign taking place at the moment. However, this hasn't stopped people putting forward arguments in favour of independence or for the Union. The SNP has made no secret of their primary goal, that of Scottish independence, and has seen its support rise over the last number of years, not diminish. Nicola Sturgeon's warning about Brexit has come true, and while Scotland voted to remain in the EU, it was dragged out along with Northern Ireland. Brexit has changed everything, and there seems to be a head-in-the-sand approach to independence when it comes to pro-union parties in Scotland. However, those arguing for the Union are probably making a massive mistake when they try to push for the status quo. This was perfectly explained by Stephen Gethins, a professor of international relations at the University of St Andrews, when he spoke on a BBC show.
I think the first thing you can learn from the Brexit process is the value of productive and respectful debate. It was rushed through. I mean, I remember I put down an amendment saying you shouldn't be having this 6 weeks afterwards. That was your first mistake. And then all of a sudden you've left the EU without, I'm afraid to say, your colleagues at Westminster really understanding what the EU did or the value in the single market, which now contributes to the energy crisis, the food and drink crisis, all of these common areas. On the point around, oh, well, it was so terrible, that means we can't have independence. What you're really arguing there is we've made a really bad mistake here, and we made such a bad mistake that, that you've got to stick with it. Now, what we've seen in terms of politics in Scotland, and I thought Kenny Farquharson from The Times had a really interesting debate today about civic unionism and about civic nationalism and how we debate. And that's where you make progress in any democratic society. You debate and discuss the issues. Now, whether people like it or not, and full candour, I'm pro-independence, obviously, but people in Scotland have overwhelmingly backed a party that wants independence. Now, if the Scottish parliamentary election last year had been a Westminster election, in terms of constituency seats, the SNP would have won 580 out of the 650 seats. Now, it's proportional, thankfully, so you get a more proportionate parliament and you can have that broader depth of debate and discussion. But I'm not sure that you move politics on by saying to people, regardless of how you vote, you've got it wrong and we know what's best. I actually don't think that serves a union. I'm not here to stand up for the union. I think what you need is I think you need that broad debate. I think people who support independence have got some very serious questions to answer, and I think that's legitimate. But actually, the union has changed dramatically as a result of Brexit. Boris Johnson is a radical Prime Minister who is changing the UK. Radically. Now, there is no such thing as the status quo anymore. You know, you're going to get dramatic change in your situation anyway. So why not give people a choice of whether or not that dramatic change is within the union or with independence?
Right. This is a perfect speech. I can't really add anything more to it because this is the fundamental argument, that this is the fundamental decision people will make if, I'm pretty sure, a referendum is coming, whether Boris Johnson likes it or not. But when people vote, it will not be voting for the status quo or voting for independence. It will be voting for let's be honest here, chaos under Boris Johnson, chaos under the Tories. And, you know, I've said this before, it's likely that Boris Johnson will lose the next election, but then who will come after that? Will it be Keir Starmer? And after Keir Starmer, who will it be? Look, I understand, and I'm putting my cards on the table here as well. I think Scotland should become independent. But, you know, if you want to rejoin the European Union, there are two ways of doing it. Scotland, if you're Scottish, you either rejoin through an independent Scotland or you rejoin as part of the United Kingdom. Now, one of those, it seems, would take place much quicker than the other. And if you're a business in I was going to say Northern Ireland, in Scotland, and you want to access the EU market as you had before, then it makes sense that it would be through Scottish independence. And also, I think, in a sense, culturally, Scotland is moving in a more progressive way than Westminster is. I also think that the Labour Party will win the next election. They may need to form a coalition, and they will attempt to undo some of the damage that Boris Johnson and the Tories have done over the last decade. But as soon as they're out, the Tories will be back to wreak havoc once again. And the voice Scotland has in Westminster is extremely limited. And I've said this before, if you're a Scottish person and you're looking at Westminster, what do you see? You see the likes of Boris Johnson fat-shaming Ian Blackford, the Tory MPs ignoring questions from SNP MPs and also other Scottish MPs. Even Scottish Tories, like Douglas Ross, was browbeaten, in a sense, by Jacob Rees-Mogg, ignored, treated as a fool, disrespected. So what sort of message does that send? Yes, the Labour Party would undo some of that, but you'd be just waiting for the Tories to come back into power, and we'll be back to square one again. So if it comes to rejoining the European Union, I think the fastest track for Scottish people would be through Scottish independence. And if it's about having more power in Westminster, I don't know how that would take place, either with a Labour government or with a Conservative one. I think this was a wonderful speech. He was being honest here when he said that he supports independence, but he was right that Brexit changed everything. It ushered in a radical prime minister. And the future under Boris Johnson or under the Tories is extremely unpredictable. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you thought about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.